Okay, hope we are live right now, and I'm sure everything is set up correctly, I hope. Okay, so we have two messages already that were posted, I think, 3 hours ago from Wiglord. Am I too early? Yeah, man, we're too early. Thanks for checking out the stream anyway. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Today we'll be creating a UI management system in Fish Networking. It's going to be a multiplayer UI management system, of course. And the reason I'm doing this live stream is because a lot of people have difficulty creating UIs and synchronizing them. Like some people seem to think that everything, even the UI, needs to be a network object. It needs to be a network behavior. It needs to use RPCs and stuff. When in reality, that's not the case at all. So in this stream, hopefully, we'll learn how to create UI that's easily synchronizable and at the same time not using network objects and network behaviors for it. I have kind of already made the same system in one of my old videos, which is called a UI management system. I'm going to link it after the stream is over. I highly recommend that you go ahead and watch that video after the stream, of course, because it's like a really powerful system, and it's very like easily extendable and allows you to how do I say this, modularize your UI and use it without relying on like direct references to the UI objects and stuff like this. So yeah, I hope you will enjoy the stream, and let's get started. As you can see here, I have a scaffold project I created earlier. It has a prefabs folder, a scenes folder, scripts folder, and some subfolders, one called player components, one called UI, and inside the UI folder we have two folders, managers and views. This structure is quite similar to the one I used in my multiplayer FPS stream. So yeah, first let's just keep in mind that I'm not going to go over all the basics when it comes to Fish networking. I'm going to do everything in front of you so you can go back and watch what I just did, or just ask a question and I will gladly answer it, okay? So let's go ahead and begin. First, I have two scenes, scene 1 and scene 2. One is going to be our online scene and one is going to be our offline scene, okay? I have already gone ahead and put them in the build settings. So yeah, and I did a quick build to test that everything is working and to make it so building is a little faster when we do real builds and stuff like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new empty object and call it network manager. I'm going to make it our first sibling. I'm going to go ahead and add my network manager component. Oh, actually, I forgot the most important thing that is importing Fish networking. So I'm going to go ahead real quick and do that. I'm going to go to the GitHub. I'm going to go and latest release, download this package, and I'm going to open it in Unity when it finishes downloading. I'm going to import everything. I'm going to take a second here. Not really a second, yeah. Alright, now that we have Fishnet in our project, let's go ahead and go to our network manager object and search for network manager and add it to our object, okay? This error should go away when we go ahead and assign the default prefab objects. I'm going to change my resistance to destroy oldest. And that's pretty much it for the network manager. We just need to go ahead and create a real quick UI like server starting and stopping script. So I'm going to go ahead and begin like the UI system now. Let's not rush anything, we have plenty of time. So what's the concept or like the basics of this UI management system? The whole idea is everything is a view. Like you have a heads-up display, that's a view. You have a main menu, that's a view. You have any kind of thing that can be displayed on the screen that contains other controls like buttons, texts, and stuff. It's a view, okay? This makes it easy, so you don't like have to use direct game objects and stuff like this. You can just use the type of the view to display it or hide it. And it makes it very flexible, so you can initialize disabled objects without having to enable them first. Yeah, so let's go ahead inside our UI views folder and right click and create a new C# script and call it view. And we'll wait until it opens up in Visual Studio. Okay, our view class is going to be an abstract class deriving from mono behavior, okay? Mono behavior, not the network behavior, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. Abstract, public abstract class view. And let's remove the code here. I'm going to check the chat real quick. Okay, we have 3 people so far. And once you have made your view class, let's start adding some basic members, okay? First, I'm going to have a public boolean is initialized, and we're going to make it get and privately settable. Make sure this is private, and I know that since this class is abstract, none of the child classes are going to be able to set this, and that's the idea. Okay, I'm going to have a public virtual void show and a public virtual void hide. And before these two, we're going to have a public virtual void initialize. And inside the initialize function, this is where we are simply going to set our boolean to true, is initialized to true. So now we enforce that all the child views need to either override this method and call the base, so they are initialized, or simply not override it and use the default implementation. In that case, it's simply going to initialize the view. Okay, let's remove the unused namespaces and let's go to our show function here. Of course, the show function is going to be simple. It's simply going to enable the game object. So game object.set active true, and the hide method is going to disable it. Bad idea. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the view class for now. We're going to add more complex functionality later. Okay, now let's go ahead and create a view manager class. So go to UI managers and right click, create C# script, and we're going to call it view manager. The view manager is going to be a singleton class that exists on a per scene basis. So every scene is going to have its own view manager, and there can only be a single view manager in the scene. That's how I like to do it. You can of course customize the system to your liking, but for now let's keep it simple and use a singleton. Okay, so first I'm going to seal my view manager class because nothing is going to derive from it. I'm going to go ahead and add a public static view manager instance. I'm going to make it public get and private set. I'm going to go ahead inside my awake method and I'm going to say instance equals this. Okay, now we'll need some fields. The first one is going to be a serialized field, private view array, and we're going to call it views. So this is basically going to store a reference to all the views in our scene. Okay, so that we can use functions that we're going to add to retrieve, show, or hide them. Okay, now let's go down here and add a let me see, yeah, a public void initialize. So when we call this initialize method here, it's going to initialize our views and set them up, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I did a similar thing in my multiplayer FPS stream. You can go and check that out. But the system in that video or in that stream is kind of a dumbed down version of this. So yeah, let's continue. I'm going to, inside the initialize function, iterate over all the views. I'm going to use a for each loop for that. I'm going to call view.initialize, okay? And to show and hide my views, I'm going to have a public void show. And this show method is going to take a generic parameter of type tView. Okay? And, excuse me, we're going to add a generic type parameter constraint that basically says that this tView generic parameter must only be a class or a type that derives from a view. Okay, so how to do this? We're going to say where tView is a view, and that's pretty much it. And now we're going to add a public void, or actually don't need that. Yeah, let's just remove this. Let's focus on our show method. Okay, inside the show method, all we're going to do is simply iterate over all the views we have in the array, and check if the first if we meet any view, or if we encounter any view that's of type tView, we simply show that view and hide the rest of the views. Okay, so to do this, we simply do for each view in views, we're going to say if view, or to make it much easier, we're going to say view dot excuse me, I'm getting a little confused here. Yeah, what we're going to do is say if view is tView, so if it's the view we would like to enable or disable, we're going to call view dot show. Otherwise, we're going to say view dot hide. So whenever we find a view that matches our generic type, we're going to show that, and whenever we encounter a different class or a different type of view, we simply hide that. Okay. And now to test this, let's go ahead and go to our Unity engine and let it compile. Let's create an empty game object and call it view manager. And I'm going to add the view manager component to it. Actually, let's put it after the network manager. And let's go ahead and create a canvas. And let's select the canvas and change the UI scale mode. Let's set it to maybe 960 by 540, which is a 16:9 aspect ratio. And let's move the match slider all the way to the right. Okay. The reason I did this, by the way, in the last stream, and I'm doing it right now, is when you are making a landscape game, okay, you need to match the height of the view, not the width, because the width will scale depending on the height. Okay. When making a portrait game, you need to match the width more than the height, like make it, we move the match slider to all the way to the left, so that when the width of the screen changes, the height as well of the scale of the height changes as well. This makes sure that whatever resolution you have, you will always have a perfect, placed UI, or not like perfect in most cases. Yeah, you will still need to adjust for different aspect ratios, but this totally depends on what you're trying to do. Okay, let's just put it to 1 here, and inside the canvas I'm going to right click and create a new empty game object. I'm going to call it main view, or simply multiplayer view. I'm going to make it so it fills the entire screen. Let's focus on it and switch to the 2D mode. Move everything all the way to be 0. Yeah, so now we have our multiplayer view. How are we going to implement this? Let's go ahead inside our views folder and right click create C# script. I'm going to call it multiplayer view. We open this in Visual Studio, And now I'm going to seal this class, and I'm going to inherit from view. I'm going to remove all the default code here, and now I'm going to do what I'm going to do now is add a serialized field of type private button, let's say host button, another one for the connection, so connect button. And now to initialize these, I'm going to go ahead and override the initialize method, and inside the initialize method I'm going to go ahead and keep the base call as the last thing, and go here and say host button dot on click dot add listener, and I'm going to say instance finder dot server manager dot start connection, and I'm going to add instance finder dot client manager dot start connection, so that way we start a server and then immediately connect a client to it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add connect button dot on click dot add listener, and this one is simple. I'm just simply going to say instance finder dot client manager dot start connection, so that way we simply connect. Now when this UI is initialized, it will add these listeners or callbacks to the on click function of the host and connect button. Okay, and simply let's remove the unnecessary usings here, and that's all we need. Okay, so let's see. We have a question from Ugumba. So how will this be multiplayer UI? I'm still setting up the UI system itself, and we're going to go to the multiplayer part of the video, of the stream later. How this will be multiplayer is that we're going to be able to synchronize different data, display different data on the UI, and without relying on sync vars or having the UI itself networked. It'll be a pretty cool system, and it will save you a lot of headaches later. Oh, Roy Drinkwater. Oh, hello, Mr. Bolt. How are you? Welcome to the stream. Glad to see you. So yeah, let's go inside Unity now. And I'm going to select my multiplayer view object. I'm going to go ahead and drag my multiplayer view script and add it onto it. And now I'm going to create a couple of buttons. Need to import the default TMP essentials. I'm going to change the transform on the button to be something more appealing. I'm going to change the anchor to the top right corner. Oh, we have a message from Roy Drinker. Good, ready to see you code this UI like a boss. Oh, thank you. You haven't missed a lot, so yeah, that's actually great. So yeah, now we have a button here. Let's go ahead and call it host button, and let's duplicate it and rename it this one to connect button. I'm going to drag this down, change the text on the host button to rename these, and change the text here to be host and the text here to be connect. Now we need to assign the references here and here. Okay, so assign the host and connect buttons to their respective fields. And let's go to our view manager now and add our multiplayer view object. Okay, now if we enter play mode, okay, you'll see that nothing really happens, but when we click on host, oh, wait a second, what the heck? Oh yeah, excuse me, I forgot to go ahead to the view manager and call the initialize function and start. So here start, and we're going to call the initialize function. Okay, and now when I enter play mode and click on host, you'll see that we get a server starting. Okay, and when I click connect, since a client has already started when we hosted, nothing happens, but you get the idea. The UI is initialized and it's good to go. Now we need to add a way for us to send and receive data to the UI without like having to get a direct reference to the view itself. Like say we have a text label here, so say for example score text, and I would like to change its text, but I don't want to expose the field or like make it a public field or anything like that. I simply want to send data to the UI, and whenever I show it, it changes this data, okay, or uses a value that I sent to it to this to set the text, okay. I'm going to go ahead and open up my view class again, and inside the show function here, I'm going to add a parameter of type object, and I'm going to call it args and give it a default value of no, okay. We're not going to use it here, but in the overrides, like the multiplayer view, I can go ahead and say override show, and I'm going to call the base show method, but at the same time I'm going to do a little check. For example, I'm going to say if the supplied arguments is a string, let's say for example message, okay. So this is what's called pattern matching. You match a variable or an argument against a type or a set of types, and if it does match, then this if statement evaluates to true and stores the evaluation result inside this message function here, variable here, okay. So let's go ahead and say debug.log the message, okay. Let's go to our view manager now again and go to our show function and add the same argument, so object argument, and we're going to set it to null. Then supply the view here with the argument, okay. So now when we show our view, we can simply give it like initialize it with some data or whatever, okay. And let's go ahead and add some fields here. So let's go and add a serialized field, private boolean automatically initialize, okay. And inside the start function here, I'm going to say if auto initialize, then automatically initialize the UI, okay. And let's go ahead and add another field. We're going to call it serialized field, private view default view. The default view is like the menu, or sorry, the view you would like to display when the view manager is first initialized, okay. Like say for example you are into a main menu and you would like to show the main view or like the settings view the first thing when the game starts. So we set the default view and we show it when the game first starts, okay. Now I'm going to go here inside my initialize function. I'm going to initialize all the views and I'm going to hide all of them by default, okay. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say default view dot show. The reason I am not calling initialize first here is because you should add the default view to the views array as well, okay. So it gets initialized alongside the rest of the views. And let's add a null check here. So if default view is not equal to null, show the default view. Otherwise, if you like to have the game blank until some condition is met or whatever, you can leave this null, okay. That's pretty much it for now. So let's go to our Unity now and wait for it to compile. Let's go to our view manager here and let's assign the default view to be the multiplayer view. Notice how I have it both here and here. And I'm going to check the auto initialize checkbox as well. And I'm going to save and go ahead, and to demonstrate that this will allow you to initialize or set the data on the UI without having the game object enabled, let's go and disable it, okay. So once we do this, let's save and enter play mode, and you will see that the main view is automatically initialized and we have it right here, okay. That's cool. Now let's go ahead and add another view, for example, just to test our data bathing ability, like functions. Let's add a message view. Go ahead and message view here and press enter. let's go ahead and seal this class and derive from view. And I'm not going to override the initialize function here. I'm going to initialize the show method. Okay, sorry, I shouldn't say initialize function, it's method as well. Okay, let's add a text mesh pro UI text. Let's say message text, and I'm going to go ahead here and set check if arguments is a string. I'm going to go ahead and say message text equals message. Otherwise, I'm going to say message text equal no data. Okay, now I'm going to remove the unused namespaces, and I'm going to go ahead to my multiplayer view, and let's add a button for testing. So let's add a serialized field, private button. Let's call it show, or simply message button here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and say message button.onClick.add listener, and we're simply going to call view manager .show, .instance .show our message view. You see how I call the show method here, simply and giving it the type of the view I would like to show. I don't need like a direct reference to the view. I don't need a tag or a name to search for. I simply search using the type. Okay, and I'm going to send a string, let's say hello world. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and remove this debug statement here. Let's remove this whole override anyways. Let's go inside of Unity again. Let's go to our canvas and create an empty object. Let's call it message view. Let's reset all the values, and let's add a message view component. Let's create a text right here, and we're going to call it the message text. Okay, I'm going to, what the heck, Unity, my scroll wheel is dying right now. Okay, let's center this text here, increase the width of it, change the color to something more visible, and let's go ahead and assign the field here, and let's make sure to drag our message view and add it to our views here. Okay, this is very important. Now let's go ahead and disable our message view. Let's go ahead and enable our multiplayer one, add another button, call it message button. Going to move it down like here. Let's change the text here to message. Let's assign the reference here. Okay, now I'm going to disable both views, and since we have the default view as the as the multiplayer view, it is going to be the first thing to show up. So let's enter play mode, and you can see that the message view is disabled and the multiplayer view is the one that's shown. Let's go ahead and click on the message button, and you see that our view has changed and we get our string hello world. That's really nice, and you can pass any type of data. You're not just limited to strings. You can pass objects, you can pass whatever. It simply takes a parameter that you decide what it does. Okay, so let's go ahead now, and where do we need to go next? Remove the message view, remove the message button, remove the message view component, open up our multiplayer view and remove all the references to the messaging stuff. And now all we need to do is go ahead and go to Unity, wait for it to compile, and now let's add the multiplayer part of the UI. Okay, as I did in my first-person shooter live stream, I'm going to use a player component that's automatically spawned as the identity component of the connection. So I'm going to right-click, create player script. Okay, going to go inside the player, and I'm going to seal the class and this time I'm going to inherit from network behavior. To remove the default code and remove all the unnecessary usings. And inside our player script here, I'm going to override the onStartClient function. The onStartClient function is a network callback method that's automatically called when the client starts. You see here I have the base call as the first statement in my function, in my method, and you should always do this. Never call the base method of a network callback after anything. Just always call it first. Calling it after anything could have undesired side effects, that could be hard to debug and hard to see, So let's go down here and we are going to check if we are not the owner, so we're not is owner. We simply exit out of the function. Otherwise, we're going to say viewManager.instance.initialize, You see here, we're going to initialize the view manager and the UI only if we are the owners of this connection, so that you don't get multiple players trying to interact with the same UI, and pass data to the same views, And I'm pretty sure we simply need to go ahead here and add a sync_var, for example, and we're going to call it public int score. So this is going to be our player score, and I'm going to go ahead and inside my update function, and I'm going to say if not is owner, we return, and I'm going to check input with get key down key code dot, let's say R, and when we press R, we're going to send an RPC to the server that synchronizes our that sets our score to a random value. So we're going to say server set score, and we're going to pass it a random dot range. We're going to say from 0 to maybe like 1024. And a good trick I love to do is sometimes instead of using a method, I use a property. So I do something like this. So public int score. I simply add a get method and a private set method, and I go ahead and annotate the property with field, serialized field, and here I'm going to say that the set method is a server RPC. Now I don't need this score field here, so I can simply remove it, and instead of trying to create a server RPC, I simply go ahead and say score equals random.range 0 to 1024. The reason this works is the set accessor here is simply a method. The compiler will automatically generate a method for you called setScore, and it will annotate it with the server RPC function, server RPC attribute, So you don't need to create an RPC or anything like that, Now I'm going to remove the unnecessary usings. I'm going to exit the player class, go to Unity, and go to my network manager, go ahead and add a player spawner and a default scene component. Now let's go ahead and create an object for our player, a player object. Let's add the player component, and let's initialize the score to by default to something like let's see 22 for example, and let's drag and drop the player prefab here. Let's remove it from the scene, go to the network manager and assign our player prefab here. I'm not going to add to default scene, and I'm going to drag my scene 1 as my offline scene and scene 2 as my online scene. Now when I enter play mode and click on, we have an error. That's because when I removed the message view from here, I forgot to remove it from the array, so it's giving me a missing reference or a null reference. So I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to clear the console. Now I'm going to enter play mode and click on host, and we get an error. Interesting. Now let's see what's causing this error. It's this call right here. Alright. What's funny is we never call the hide method, do we? That's very interesting. Yeah, that's because the you see here the player component is trying to initialize the UI. Excuse me for that background noise. It's trying to initialize the UI before the scene is loaded. Okay, that should be easily fixed. So let's go ahead in the network manager here, and I'm going to go ahead and let's see. This shouldn't actually happen. Let's go ahead and try again. So let's click on host. This is interesting. Network manager, yeah. What's interesting is it's calling, yeah. It's because the player spawner, if you go ahead here, this calls, I think, right before the scene is loaded, or I think like one frame earlier, so it's causing this error. This is the first time I encountered this bug. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to say if is spawned. So if we did actually spawn, we initialize the UI. Okay. Oh, excuse me. This is a very dumb mistake. Excuse me. This is because we didn't add a view manager to our second scene. Yeah, excuse me. Now let's go ahead and scene number 2. Right click, create an empty object, call it view manager, and I'm going to set as the first sibling. Okay. Going to reset my transform and add my view manager component. This time I'm not going to set it to auto initialize. I'm going to initialize it only when the player does. Okay, so since we have nothing now, it should just not log the error. Let's go right click on host, and yeah, we don't get any errors. So yeah, the idea is to never forget to add a view manager to your scenes that require it, okay? Or simply add a null check inside your player. Now let's exit the play mode and go ahead and create a new view. This view we are going to create a simply going to display the player score and allow us to disconnect or see the player count, okay? Let's go views, C# script, and let's say main main view. Now let's seal the main view class, add a inherit from the view class, remove the default code, and now we're going to have a serialized field, private text mesh pro EGI, and we're going to call it score text. Another serialized field, private text mesh pro. Let's call it player count text. Okay. Let's also add a couple of texts here, one that displays whether we are on the server or not, and one that displays whether we are on the client or not. Okay, so serialized field, private text mesh pro EGI here, and say you know what, let's say info text. Let's give it a single text component, and let's move it to be the first field right here. Okay, now inside our late update function, I always prefer to update my UI in late update so that it receives the latest data. Okay, you can update it anywhere. I simply do update it inside the late update function. Okay, method. Now I'm going to go ahead and say if not is initialized, return. So whenever we try to update data on the UI, simply without being initialized, simply exit the method. Okay, This is because if we try to simply update the data in the late update, the view might have not initialized, or it might have initialized early so that the data isn't in sync with the player, or is corrupt, or it gives us errors. Okay, so always use the not is initialized check in your methods. Okay, sorry, in your views. Okay. Now let's go down here and say info text equals, sorry, the text equals is server equals, let's see, instance finder dot is server. Now we're going to say is client equals instance finder dot is client, and finally let's see, is host equals instance finder dot is host. So it'll basically display the string with the interpolated values of is server, is client, and is host. Okay, now let's go to the score text, and now this one will require us to get a reference to our player. Okay, since the usually what I do is only have a single player object per connection, I go ahead and do something like add a singleton. So public static player instance get private set, and when I initialize when I get the onStart client function called, I'm going to go ahead and say instance equal this. Notice how I set the player instance before I set the view manager's one. Okay, this is very important, so you always like don't get null reference exceptions and stuff like this. Okay, and let's go back to our main view and say score text dot text equals player instance dot score. Let's set it to an interpolated string. Let's say score equals points. Okay, equals player instance dot score points. Okay, and for the player count text, we're going to go ahead and say player count text dot text equals server manager, sorry, instance finder dot server manager dot connections, sorry, dot clients dot count. Okay, and we set this to an interpolated string as well. So let's say clients equal, or let's say players, okay, equals this. Okay, now let's go ahead in Unity and go into the scene number 2, right click, UI, canvas. Let's go ahead and save time and copy and paste the canvas from our main scene. Let's delete this one and paste these two. Now I'm going to go to my multiplayer view, and I'm going to remove all of the the multiplayer view and stuff. I'm going to say main view. Okay, and let's see, what do we need? We need to remove the host and connect buttons, but actually I'm going to keep one of the buttons so I can make it into a disconnect button. So I'm going to call this one disconnect button, and I'm going to remove the host one. I'm going to move this one up. I'm going to select the text here and set it to disconnect. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add some texts to my main view. So I'm going to say, what was the first one? Info text. The other one is going to be score text, and the last one is player count text. Okay, I'm going to select all of the 3 components. They have good heights, so I'm going to simply change the pivot to be 0 and 1, change the color to be black, for example, and I'm going to move them initially all to -10, and sorry, set the anchor to the top left corner, so -10 and 10. Yeah, it should be, sorry, 10 and -10. Yeah, let's center align them, and let's increase the width of all of them to something like 500, because they're going to display very large strings. Okay, let's reduce the font size to like 24, and I'm going to go ahead and move them so they are not overlapping. I really hate when Unity simply adds these like 0.2 thingies. You can simply fix it by changing the value and reassigning it, but it's just annoying. Yeah. Okay, now I'm going to change this to be like in, yeah, let's keep the black colors. And let's go ahead and assign our texts. Yeah, we need to remove the multiplayer view and add the main view component. Set the info, the score, and the player count. And I'm going to disable my main view, go to my view manager, add the main view to the views array and add it as a default view. I'm going to keep auto initialize unchecked. Okay, so now when I go to scene number 1 and enter play mode, when I click on host or when I connect as a client, you'll see that my player initializes the UI and we get our main view displayed. Let's click on host, and we indeed do. You can see that we have is server set to true, is client set to true, and is host set to true. We get our score displayed and we get the player count. Okay, now let's make a quick build to test whether our code works on a real player or not. Let's go ahead and change just the size of the info text first to something like 16 maybe, so it fits the whole string on one line. We can use auto sizing, but yeah. Let's go to scene 1. Let's control P to build. Oh, excuse me. Going to give it access to our firewall. Oh, wait a second. We need to adjust the size of the player. Sorry. Let's go to the player here. Windowed. Let's do 960 by 540. Resizable window, and yeah. Let's go ahead and do another quick build. Much better. Okay, now when I go into an interplay mode, I'm going to host the game here, and then I'm going to connect here, and you will see that the two different values are displayed depending on which player. And you can see that there is no data conflict. Like here we have is server true, and client is true, and is host is true. And now we have here, since this is simply just a client, only is client is set to true. And the player count isn't incorrect because the server manager here isn't initialized. Okay, since only the client one is so. So we'll add a fix to this, no problem. Now when I go here, I would like to demonstrate that the score changes syncs correctly. So I'm going to go here, since the editor is the server. When I change my score here, it will change correctly. As you can see here, we display the score of this player, and then the score of this player remains the same. Now let's see if we change this here, it updates. No, yeah, because the editor doesn't synchronize the sync var. Okay, sorry, because we're using a property. Now I'm going to click R here. Oh, wait a second, was it R or was it what? Let's see. Interesting. So when I do it here, it works, but yeah. So yeah, maybe because I did a desync. So let's go ahead and scene number 1. Oh yeah, excuse me. I forgot to add the sync var attribute here. Come on, chat, try and remind me. Okay, now when I go ahead and build my player, interplay mode, I'm going to host here, then I'm going to connect here. Now when I click on R, we simply change the value here, and you'll find that it's 1616 here, 616 here, and you can see that it is indeed the correct value on the server as well. And when I change the value on the server, it doesn't affect the client. Okay, now let's add the disconnection functionality. Let's go to our multiplayer, our Visual Studio, go to main view, and I'm going to add a reference to the disconnect button, private button, disconnect button. I'm going to go, now I'm going to override the initialize method. And I'm going to say disconnect button .onClick.add listener. I'm going to say if instance finder.sServer. Then we say instance finder.server manager.stop connection. And by the way, let's just first pass through here. When you call server manager.stop connection, if you have a host client connected to the server, it will automatically be disconnected as well. So you don't have to call instance finder.client manager.stop connection when you are the host, okay? Now I'm going to go here and say else if instance finder.is client instance finder.client manager.stop connection. And it must be an else if, okay? Because we simply do want to disconnect the client if we are the client, or if we are the server, we're simply going to disconnect the server and the rest is done for us, okay? Now to change this, I'm going to simply, like to fix the player count issue, I'm simply going to go to the player and I'm going to go ahead and say field serialize field and field sync var public int player count, say get and private set. We're going to say server RPC as the attribute for our set accessor, and I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to say if is server player count is going to equal to server manager dot clients dot count. This is usually not a good idea, like to set sync vars using is server checks. It works fine when you are sure 100% that the object is present on the server, and that changing the sync var inside a check like this is fine, okay? If you try and change a sync var on the client, it won't work, okay? Now go to our main view, change this here to use our player.instance.player count. Okay, now let's go ahead and add a simple check here and say if instance finder is server else, sorry, let's say is host. Let's remove this, add it here, and go down here and say player count text game object.set active to true, and otherwise we say player count text game object.set active to false, so that the player count is only displayed on the server. Now when you think about it, we don't need the sync var on this, but let's just keep it for now. But I suggest that you remove it. Let's go to scene number 2, select our main view, and add the reference to the disconnect button. Go to scene number 1, and now let's test in the editor. Let's click on host, and as you can see, oh wait a second, we cannot complete the action because we're not the owner of this object. Yeah. Let's go to our player here and add the set the require ownership, or simply let's just remove this and say we don't need all of that. Yeah, let's remove it. Go to the main view and set this to server manager dot instance finder dot server manager dot clients dot count. Now let's go and enter play mode, click on host, and you can see that we have the correct player count. And now let's try and disconnect, and as you can see, we go back to our main scene and the UI is reinitialized, and we can click host again. Okay, this is a bug with the player spawner. It doesn't really work when you have destroy oldest, so for this for the sake of getting it to work, let's just set it to destroy newest. Let's click on enter play mode. Let's click host, enter the game, let's change our score a little bit. Let's click disconnect. Now let's try hosting again, and as you can see, it works now. As I said, this is a bug with the player spawner component, so you should keep that in mind. Okay, now let's do a quick build. And let's go ahead and host in the editor and connect from the player. As you can see, we have the player count text disabled, since this instance of the player is not the server, and we have it visible here and it shows the correct player count. Now when I change the score, it says to a random value, and when I do in the client, it does the same. And if I attempt to disconnect on the client, it will simply disconnect on the client. Yeah, we get an error here, so let's go ahead and see what's wrong. Let's exit here. Let's host in the player. Let's connect from the editor. Let's connect here, and let's attempt to disconnect, and we get a couple of errors. These are mainly used, it's a bug with the default scene component, again, due to the way it's initializing. This shouldn't affect you. Like in general, simply add a null check or set the destroy persistence mode on the network manager to destroy oldest. Okay, but as you can see now, we have a UI that works and synchronizes data, and you don't need to use network objects on the UI or use network behaviors on the UI. This of course works as well if you have an adaptive scene that you can add the view manager and some views to it, and it will work just fine. I think that's pretty much it for this live stream. I know I didn't go into too much detail because I want to keep this simple, and yeah, so I'm going to see if we have any questions in the chat. So I'm going to stay for like extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes. If anyone would like to ask a question, go ahead. Okay, goodbye, Bolt. Gotta go to bed. Good night. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Ugumba, thanks for these streams. These best practices and examples are really helpful. Thank you so much. I really I'm really happy that you enjoyed the stream. Again, if anyone has any questions related to this UI or whatever, I can answer it. Okay, it seems that we have no questions so far. Just gonna give it an extra 1 or 2 minutes, because you never know, someone could be typing, and when you end the stream, the message is sent and you will never see it. Okay, it seems that no one is going to ask any questions. Okay, so I'm going to say this at the end of the stream real quick. The reason is you should never network the UI is it causes so many problems, and I notice a lot of people over on the First Q Games Discord server getting like errors and undesired behavior when they add network objects or network behaviors to their UI. They have difficulty synchronizing it, and I always say never try to network the UI. Just network the data and display it on the UI. This is the whole idea behind this UI system here. It allows you to display the same views using the same code on both the client and the server, and simply use the data that's being synchronized by fish networking and display it on the UI. Okay, this saves you so much time instead of like trying to hack your way around nested network objects and all this kind of like distraction crap. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed the stream. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to everyone who stayed till the end. I will catch you hopefully soon. I have a coffee, like a coffee page, a link I'm going to link in the description. If you'd like to support me by donating, please consider checking it out. Thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you in the next stream.